Hi, welcome back to this free-for-all Friday edition of Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll get back to the phones here in just a minute, 888-589-8840. Now, you might have followed this story or been dimly aware of it. There was an execution in Ohio yesterday, and apparently it was a pretty grisly affair. The guy took like 15 to 25 minutes to die. And the reason is that the companies that make the drugs, the lethal drugs that are used to put somebody to death by lethal injection, they refuse to let their drugs be used to put somebody to death. So Ohio had to come up with their own cocktail to put this guy to death. This is a piece off American Thinker. Manufacturers refuse to sell the drug used in previous executions, phenobarbital, for the purpose of state-sponsored executions. He uses the word killings, but he's against capital punishment, so he's influencing the way people think about it by his language. This forced the state to use a cocktail of midazolam, a sedative, and hydromorphone, a morphine derivative. So here he describes, and he calls this a barbaric execution. He says this is grisly is the word he uses, and it's barbaric. And he describes how the death occurred. The chemicals began flowing at 10:29 a.m. The guy was not pronounced dead until 10:53 a.m. In other words, it took 24 minutes from the moment the chemicals began to flow into this guy's body until he was officially pronounced dead. Here's the description. At about 10:34 a.m., he began struggling. His body strained against the restraints around his body. He repeatedly gasped for air, making snorting and choking sounds for about 10 minutes. His chest and stomach heaved. His left hand, which he had used minutes earlier to wave goodbye to his family, clenched in a fist. McGuire eventually issued two final silent gasps and became still pronounced dead 10:53 a.m. So the left has gone apoplectic on this, how barbaric capital punishment is, how barbaric this procedure was, how cruel, inhumane, grisly this whole thing was. Now, it's interesting to me what nobody is talking about. In fact, I went to look up what happened with the original crime. Why is this guy being put to death? What did he do that merited the death penalty? And I had to go to the 7th page today, ladies and gentlemen. I had to go to the 7th page on my Google search to find an article that talked about what this guy did to his victim. Now, I want to alert you that for the next couple of minutes, this is going to be PG-13 material, so be advised. This story goes back to 1989. So here we are, 2014. This guy committed the deed in 1989. It took 25 years for the victim and her family to get justice. And you want to talk about something that's obscene. You want to talk about something that's barbaric. You want to talk about something that's grisly. It is asking the families of the victim to wait 25 years for justice. That's what's inhumane. That's what's cruel. And that's what's barbaric. Here's what happened. Joy Stewart was the victim. And Jeff Mullen is writing this column in Enid, Oklahoma. And he says, look, nobody is speaking up for Joy Stewart. You got all these people speaking up for the perpetrator. They don't want him to die this agonizing death, that brutal death. So we got everybody speaking up for him. Who was speaking up for Joy Stewart? Here's what happened. She was 22, a newlywed, and about 30 weeks pregnant. She lived in West Alexandria, a small town about 20 miles west of Dayton. On February 11, 1989, 25 years ago, they had to wait for justice, 25 years. She crossed paths with Dennis McGuire, as the guy that was executed. After breakfast that morning, Joy Stewart went to visit the mother of a friend. The woman had hired a man to clean out her gutters. The man was Dennis McGuire. Stewart made a mistake that day, apparently accepting a ride from McGuire. Her body was found the next day in a wooded area near a creek. An autopsy revealed she had been stabbed twice with a single-edged blade less than 5 inches long. One wound near her left collarbone did little damage, but the other was so deep it severed both her carotid artery and jugular vein. Doctors determined Joy was alive when her throat was slashed. She likely lost consciousness within seconds, was dead in a minute or so, her lifeblood spilling from her. Her unborn child, of course, died with her. Joy Stewart's suffering began before the stabbing, however. According to the autopsy, she was not only raped but sodomized prior to her death. McGuire later told a fellow inmate he killed her because she became hysterical, and he was afraid he would go to jail for raping a pregnant woman. Joy Stewart would be 47 years old if she were alive today. Her child would be approaching 25, but their lives were stolen from them on that day, that long ago February day. And a lot of the accounts have been filled with compassion for Dennis McGuire about his troubled upbringing and all that. And here's what the family said. As I recall the events preceding her death, forcing her from the car, attempting to rape her vaginally, sodomizing her, choking her, stabbing her, I know she suffered terror and pain. He is being treated far more humanely than he treated her. Could not agree more. Let's go to the phones. And again, I apologize for the directness of the language, but I'm just reading from news accounts, and that's what happened, ladies and gentlemen. And the fact that that woman and her family had to wait 25 years to get justice, that's another crime that's been committed here. That's what's inhumane. That's what's grisly. That's what's barbaric. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to Eugenia in Preston, West Virginia. Eugenia, welcome. What's on your mind?
I just have issue with limiting voting rights to landowners. If you do that, I just wonder how many young privates we sent in harm's way would lose their voting rights, as well as some of their parents, and even bring a little bit closer home, maybe to you, maybe ministers who live in parsonages.
Yeah. Now, I want to be clear here that I'm not advocating that we go back to that. You know, people are accusing me of proposing that. I'm not advocating for that at all. In fact, all of those property rights restrictions on voting, they were eliminated in the United States by 1850 in favor of the universal suffrage. Now, the Constitution would still permit a state to do that if they wanted to, but I'm not pressing for that. I'm not advocating for that. But what I'm saying is that was the standard for a time, and there were good reasons for that standard. Anyway, go ahead. I'll give you the last word, Eugenia.
I just think to say to those soldiers and maybe parents of those soldiers that they don't have skin in the game, quote unquote, is pretty insulting.
Well, I'm not denying them the right to vote.
Right, but to even insinuate that there's no skin in the game.
But Eugenia, that was the reason why the founders restricted the vote to landowners, is they wanted people who were going to have to deal with the consequences of regulation, deal with the consequences of the tax burden. And the landowners were the ones that were going to provide jobs for people that would go into the military.
Now, to fight our wars, that might be all right.
Yeah, but the guys that own the property, they're the ones that are going to provide jobs for the guys that go fight our wars and pay the taxes to enable them to do it. So they were going to be concerned to make sure they could support the war effort properly. Focal Point, AFR Talk.